Okay. 1 Kings 12. So let's go ahead and read the last couple of verses of 1 Kings 11 just to recap Solomon's death. As for the other events of Solomon's reign, all he did, and the wisdom he displayed, are they not written in the book of the Annals of Solomon? I don't know if that's a reference to Proverbs or Ecclesiastes or some other book that we don't have anymore. I don't know. Solomon, so I can't answer the author's question. This is phrased as a question here. So it's like whoever wrote this, like I can't answer that question because I don't know. Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. Then he rested with his fathers, and we don't know how old he was when he died at that point, or when he became king. Those dates are not given. His age is not given, either his birth, his coronation, or his death. We don't know. Then he rested with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father. And Rehoboam, his son, succeeded him as king. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all the Israelites had gone there to make him king. That was a little bit north of Jerusalem. That was in the tribe of Ephraim's territory. And this is he is making an outreach effort to the northern tribes to get their approval for his kingship before he becomes king. When Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, remember him? We read about him a couple chapters ago. He was given permission. He was given a prophecy by God through a man named Ahijah that he was going to become king over 10 of the tribes of Israel. We saw that back in, let's see here, well, actually this previous chapter 11, verse 26 and following. It says that he rebelled against the king in chapter 11, verse 26. I don't know how. It doesn't actually say how. It says that he was told he met a prophet, as he was the leader of part of Solomon's labor force. And as he was leaving the city one day, he met this prophet on the road who gave him this prophecy about him becoming king. I don't know if he tried to take the kingship by force after that, and that's what the rebellion talks about. I don't know. I'm not really sure. The narrative is screwy there. I don't really understand it. At any rate, he somehow tried to take a claim to the kingship. It was rebuffed. Obviously didn't work. He had to flee to Egypt. Solomon then, of course, knew about Jeroboam and knew that he was going to take the throne someday, or was after it, just like Saul did in the days of David. And Jeroboam fled to Egypt to a guy named Shishak the king, who is the first king of Egypt to be named in the scriptures, by the way. And he stayed there until Solomon's death. So he's still in Egypt. So now in verse 2, chapter 12, when Jeroboam, son of Nebat, heard this, he was still in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. There's a footnote down there saying, or he remained in Egypt. It makes more sense he would return when he hears his death, hears the Solomon's death. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam, and they knew who he was. He was not just some random guy. Okay, he had been in charge of a part of Solomon's labor force. So they knew, and it said, in fact, back in chapter 11, verse 28, Jeroboam was a man of standing, and he did his work very well. So they knew who he was, and they had respect for him. So he wasn't just some random person. So they sent for him, and he and the whole assembly of Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, "Your father put a heavy yoke on us. But now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you." Rehoboam answered, "Go away for 3 days, and then come back to me." So the people went away. And this is actually, he doesn't need to spend time thinking about this. This is a pretty slam dunk decision, honestly. Rehoboam should have known going into this that he was not going to command the same level of respect or loyalty or authority over the people that Solomon did. I'm assuming that over Solomon's reign, as we read about his building projects after the temple was done, he just began adding more and more building projects to his lineup. And the people just gradually got tired of it. I don't think they were tired of it at first. When he did the temple, maybe even when he was doing the palace after that, I think the people were excited about that and wanted to get that done. But I think as time went on after that, he just kind of continued adding more and more projects that he wanted to do and he wanted the people to do for him. and they just gradually got tired of it. I don't know if it means strictly labor. It could be. I mean, heavy yoke and harsh labor sounds like labor. Could also be in the form of taxes or other impositions or things like that. At any rate, they put up with it during the days of Solomon. I'm guessing that as time went on, they kind of made up their minds that they were going to do it for Solomon's sake and for the sake of David, Solomon's father, but that when Solomon died, they wanted to change. My guess is that had probably been in the works for some time. It kind of makes me think of these COVID mandates, how they just kind of kept going on and on and on and on and on forever. People may not have been too upset with them at first. They might even have been okay with them at the beginning. You know, even I was that way, at least for a while, back in 2020. You know, it's like, okay, we'll do this. Kind of like in the days of building the temple and its palace. Like, well, that's heavy, hard, physical labor. But we'll do it. We want this temple built. We might want this palace built too, so we can be, you know, like the other kingdoms. But after that, and then it probably should have ended. Like, and that, okay, like that's good. But then we just kind of kept going on with it, like with the mask mandates. We just kind of kept going on with that. We just kind of kept that going on and on and on and on and on. And it's like, oh, what is the point? You get to the point, like, what is the point? What is the good? It's not doing anything. COVID cases are going up anyway. Like, why are we still doing this? And you start to say, okay, let's end this. Let's bring this to an end here, people. And this is actually kind of similar. Put yourself in that kind of mindset. You put up with it for a while. You go along to get along. Of course, the king tells you to do it. You do it. But you think, okay, I'll do it for this king. I'm not really going to do this again, though. When the next guy comes along, I'm going to tell him to stop. I'm going to say, okay, let's cool this down here. Rehoboam should have known that. Rehoboam should have been perceptive enough to realize that. So he says, go away for 3 days and come back to me. So the people went away. So they're willing to give him 3 days to come up with a stance. He can make up his mind and give him an answer. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. Now Solomon, I don't think, ended up living that long. He reigned for 40 years. When he becomes king, he seems to be a pretty young man. Maybe in his early 20s. I can't imagine he's much more than in his early 20s. So if he reigns for 40 years and he dies basically in his early 60s, which really isn't that old. David got to 70, and even at the end he seemed like he was 10 years older than that, probably because of all the wars he fought. Solomon didn't even fight any wars. Well, very few at least. He was and we read about Song of Solomon in Ecclesiastes, like he was a healthy person apparently for much of his life. But in the end, I guess he died. I would say he probably died prematurely. These are the men who had been with him, and they probably wouldn't be all that old either. I mean, they probably, if they're Solomon's era, they might only be in their 60s. We're not, I don't think we're really talking about like 80-plusers here. At any rate, they're still around. So King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people, he asked. They replied, if today you will be a servant to these people and serve them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. They want to follow you. They want to respect the Davidic dynasty and the claim that David's family has to the throne. But they do want you to lighten their burden, whether it's labor or taxes or some mixture of both. Like they do want you to lighten their burden. They don't want to keep doing things the way that Solomon had been doing them all the way up to the end. You got to change that. You're not Solomon. You don't command the same level of respect and loyalty that Solomon did. So it's like you need to make a change here. Now maybe as time goes on, he can earn their respect and loyalty, and maybe he can dial it back up again, like Solomon did. I think Solomon probably didn't start off as hard as he was at the end either. But you don't have that right now. You can't step in and be that guy right now, Rehoboam. Maybe 20 years from now you can be, but you can't be that right now. But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. These are his friends, his peers. I don't know how old they were. Obviously, they were younger than the elders. I guess they're in their 30s. I really don't know. Solomon himself was 41, according to the text we have here, when he became king. So I'm assuming these are people around his age. He asked them, "What is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, 'Lighten the yoke your father put on us'?" The young men who had grown up with him replied, "Tell these people who have said to you, 'Your father put a heavy yoke on us and make our yoke lighter,' tell them, 'My little finger is thicker than my father's waist.'" And remember how the girl in Song of Solomon talked about Solomon's waist? Oh man, how did she put it? Let's see here. They're like, pillars of ivory or something like that. Let's take a look here. Of course, obviously, it's a poem, a song, a figurative expression, but let's see here. Where are you? His arms or hands are rods of gold set with chrysolite. His body is like polished ivory decorated with sapphires. His legs are pillars of marble set on bases of pure gold. That's obviously figurative. But we're talking about a dude who was pretty well built. Now he's saying, "My little finger is thicker than that guy's waist. I'm tougher than he could have ever hoped to be. My father laid a heavy yoke on you. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with barbed whips," or scorpions. So he's going to make it worse. He's going to clamp down, double down. Just keep doubling down. That's what we do today. We've seen a lot of doubling down going on in our culture today. We never, ever, ever want to course correct or change direction. We just double down constantly, just constantly. That's all we ever do. 3 days later, so he's got his answer apparently. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam as the king had said. "Come back to me in 3 days." The king answered the people harshly. Rejecting the advice given him by the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, "My father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with barbed whips." So the king did not listen to the people. And this turn of events was from the Lord, to fulfill the word that the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam son of Nebat through Ahijah the Shilonite. God had said he was going to do it, and he is going to do it. He's doing it. Doesn't mean that God wants to do it or that he's happy to do it. But he said he was going to do it, and he is doing it. He is following through on his promise. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, "What share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? See your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, David." It's like, forget about you. We're just going to go off and do our own thing. In the end, what's the king going to do? The king gets his power through the consent of the people to give him their power. If they no longer consent to do that, what's the king going to do? Well, let's find out. The King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, or Adoram. Now, this guy we read before. He was a dude who was around back in Solomon's day. He is, in check 1 Kings 4, verse 6, he's Adoniram, son of Abda, in charge of forced labor. And we also read about him in chapter 5, verse 14, Adoniram was in charge of the forced labor. So same guy, it's that guy again. So King Rehoboam, so he'd be an older advisor who was around the days of Solomon and is not with Rehoboam. King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of the forced labor, but all Israel stoned him to death. King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. In the end, the king derives his authority from the people. If the people turn on him, the king doesn't have any authority any longer. And in the end, what's he going to do about that? Run away. Run away. That's what he's going to do. When all the Israelites heard that Jeroboam had returned, they sent and called him to the assembly and made him king over all Israel. Only the tribe of Judah remained loyal to the house of David. When Rehoboam arrived in Jerusalem, he mustered the whole house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin, 180,000 fighting men, to make war against the house of Israel and to regain the kingdom for Solomon, son of Solomon. For Rehoboam, son of Solomon. So they're going to try to fight these people back into submission. They're not pleased with this turn of events, and they're going to try to regain the kingdom by force. But this word of God came to Shemaiah, the man of God. Say to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Judah, to the whole house of Judah and Benjamin, and to the rest of the people, this is what the Lord says. Do not go up to fight against your brothers, the Israelites. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing. So they obeyed the word of the Lord, and they went home again, as the Lord had ordered. God himself has caused this split to happen, this schism. And the people are not going to be able to fight against it. I guess they knew enough at the time to obey. Now we're going to read about how in a few years they're going to turn away from God and stop obeying him. But apparently the people of Judah at this point in time were still faithful enough to God that they followed his command here. They may not have liked it. I'm sure Rehoboam didn't like it. But I guess they knew enough to know at this point in time not to argue with God at this point. Here is the 2 Chronicles account of the schism. This is in 2 Chronicles 10. Rehoboam went to Shechem, for all the Israelites had gone there to make him king. When Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, heard this, he was in Egypt, where he had fled from King Solomon. He returned from Egypt. There's no footnote in my text here, so I'm guessing the text is not ambiguous in the original language about whether he's going or staying in this case. It makes sense that he would go back. Like, it doesn't make sense that he would just stay there. It makes sense that he would go back. So they sent for Jeroboam, and he and all Israel went to Rehoboam and said to him, Your father put a heavy yoke on us, but now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke he put on us, and we will serve you. Rehoboam answered, Come back to me in 3 days. So the people went away. Then King Rehoboam consulted the elders who had served his father Solomon during his lifetime. How would you advise me to answer these people? He asked. They replied. I mean, at least he is asking them. I guess you could say at least Rehoboam has enough sense to ask these men. He doesn't take their advice. But at least he's not brazen enough to just ignore them and not even bother asking them for their opinion. They replied, If you will be kind to these people and please them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be your servants. But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him. Now you have to remember that when these texts are being written, by the people who are writing them and to the people who are the original audience for them, as they hear these texts, if someone is reading these off and the people in the audience are hearing them, they're supposed to be feeling a sense of regret and loss that Rehoboam made this fateful decision. You always have to keep that in mind. These texts were written to be spoken out loud to a congregation of these people at that point in time. So to really get in there and understand what's being said, we have to do whatever we can as 21st century Westerners. We have to do whatever we can to put ourselves in the mindset of these late 10th century BC ancient Israelites. That can be difficult, but once we do, and I'm not saying that I can do it because I'm not a 10th century BC ancient Israelite. Nobody is. So I can't say that I'm doing it perfectly or that I know exactly what one of these people would think at this point in time. But by understanding this culture and immersing ourselves into this history as best we can put ourselves as closely as we can, as is possible, in the mindset of these people to hear the text as they would be hearing it. I said that back in Genesis. I said over and over when we read through Genesis, put yourself in the mindset of one of those 15th century BC Hebrew men who are hearing this spoken aloud to them as Moses is reading, or some priest maybe is reading it out loud after Moses finished writing it for the first time. And hear the emphasis given over and over again to how that land is supposed to be their land, and they were the ones who didn't have the courage to go in, or the faith in God to go in and take it. And how every time they would have heard that, how that would have just been imprinted deeply under their consciences. Same thing here. As this is being spoken aloud in the assembly and read out loud by the priest in front of the people or whatever, like, you're supposed to be feeling a sense of regret and shame that Rehoboam made this decision, which caused this split, which in their day and time still has not been healed. You know, whenever they would have read this text from 930 BC onward, whenever, at that point in time, the schism, and still, physically, it never will be. Like, there never will be a united kingdom of Israel again. Even the one that exists today is just a modern state with the same name. Like, these people never will be physically united into one kingdom again. So just put yourself in that mindset whenever you hear that. They replied, if you'll be kind to these people and please them and give them a favorable answer, they will always be yours. If only Rehoboam had done the right thing here, Israel would never have split from Judah. There wouldn't be an Israel and Judah. There'd just be one full Israel. But, unfortunately that word but follows that paragraph, huh? But Rehoboam rejected the advice the elders gave him, and consulted the young men who had grown up with him and were serving him. He asked them, what is your advice? How should we answer these people who say to me, lighten the yoke your father put on us? The young men who had grown up with him replied, tell the people who have said to you, your father put a heavy yoke on us, but make our yoke lighter. Tell them, my little finger is thicker than my father's waist. My father laid on you a heavy yoke. I'll make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with barbed whips. 3 days later, Jeroboam and all the people returned to Rehoboam as the king had said, come back to me in 3 days. The king answered them harshly. Rejecting the advice of the elders, he followed the advice of the young men and said, my father made your yoke heavy. I will make it even heavier. My father scourged you with whips. I will scourge you with barbed whips. So the king did not listen to the people. This turn of events was from God, to fulfill the word the Lord had spoken to Jeroboam son of Nebat through Ahijah the Shilonite. When all Israel saw that the king refused to listen to them, they answered the king, what share do we have in David? What part in Jesse's son? To your tents, O Israel. Look after your own house, O David. Your problems are not our problems, and our problems are not your problems, and we're going to keep it that way. You go off and do whatever it is you want to do, David, but we're going to do what we want to do. So all the Israelites went home. But as for the Israelites who were living in the towns of Judah, Rehoboam still ruled over them. King Rehoboam sent out Adoniram, who was in charge of forced labor, but the Israelites stoned him to death. King Rehoboam, however, managed to get into his chariot and escape to Jerusalem. So Israel has been in rebellion against the house of David to this day. Now at this point in time, in the days of the chronicler, Israel is long gone as a nation. They were taken away into captivity in Assyria in 722 BC. And Judah was taken away into captivity in Babylon in 586 BC and was allowed to return again about 50 years later in the 530s BC. And the chronicler is writing about 100 years after that. Judah exists as a nation, although it's no longer independent. It has a governor. They're under foreign rule. And Israel is just gone. You know, they're scattered. Now, there are still some self-identifying northern Israelites out there. But they're scattered, they've intermingled and intermarried with so many other people, and they're a mixed breed. Those are going to be the Samaritans of the New Testament day. And the chronicler in the 440s BC, or whenever he's writing, is still thinking of them as being a rebellion to the house of Judah, even in his own day. He may just be straight up copying the text from Kings, but it's clear that he still considers the house of Israel to be in rebellion against Judah, even in his day. We're going to see that even in the Gospels, when Jesus and the apostles are going through the Samaritan villages, and there's still friction there. The Samaritans of the New Testament are the descendants of these northern Israelites of the Old Testament. When Rehoboam arrived in Jerusalem, he mustered the house of Judah and of Benjamin, 180,000 fighting men, to make war against Israel and to regain the kingdom for Rehoboam. But this word of the Lord came to Shemaiah, the man of God. Say to Rehoboam, son of Solomon, king of Israel, and to all the Israelites in Judah and Benjamin, this is what the Lord says. Do not go up to fight against your brothers. Go home, every one of you, for this is my doing. So they obeyed the words of the Lord and turned back from marching against Jerusalem. So the schism has happened. They're going to have border skirmishes and sometimes, warfare with each other for the next couple hundred years. But the schism has happened. They are no longer a united nation. They were not united for very long. And even at their most united, it's still kind of doubtful just how united they really were. Okay, they were a tribal confederacy of 12 different tribes, 13 kind of, if you count. There always was kind of a fuddling of the numbers there about how many of them there were, because you had Joseph who got split into two, and the Levites are kind of bought back away from the rest and all that. So you had a tribal confederacy of a dozen or so tribes and they were tribalistic in nature. The tribes were more interested in protecting and preserving their own tribe first, and then their national identity as a group of tribes making up the sons of Jacob, that was secondary. That was always secondary in the tribal period, the judges and all that. Then the kingship comes along and they get united under one king, originally a king from Benjamin, later under a king from Judah. And that is not easy. Okay, that takes a while for that to happen. Yeah, of course, you also have the tribes across the river who are somewhat disconnected from the rest. So you've got like three major areas of the kingdom. You have this part across the river, the 2.5 tribes that settled over there who are kind of distant from the rest. And you have the 8 or so tribes in the northern territories, and Judah and Benjamin and Simeon in the southern territories, and Levi kind of scattered all throughout. So you have that arrangement, and all these tribes kind of focus mainly on their own protection and provision first, with the health of the nation as a whole being secondary. Then the king comes in and tries to unite them all into one tribe, under one kingdom. That lasts for about 100 years. And then that breaks apart, and they break into 2 kingdoms again. And even later on, you're going to see, even in the northern kingdom, there's going to be like these factions that form. So they were not united for very long. Basically, the second half of David's reign and Solomon's reign. So maybe about 60 years total. And even then, there's still a difference between like Israel and Judah. So even at their most united, and they weren't united for very long, but even at their most united, they were not really all that united. Now that period is past. And at least in physical history on Earth, it's never going to, they're done. They're not going to be a united nation again. I think there was something else I wanted to mention. Okay, so one more thing before I go on. Actually, you know what? Let's start this with the next video.